Well, hello, good afternoon. It's great to have your company again. Thank you for joining us today for another instalment of our Advice for the Current Times with the brilliant Guy Dudley, Head of Advice at the NAHT. And this is brought to you in partnership with the NAHT and Discovery Education here. And we'll be talking a little bit about the Pathway programme, of course, but we'll be talking hopefully about the sort of things that are on your minds as school leaders and teachers today. And I'm sure that's many things. And thank you for joining us. We're going to be chatting about Pathway, as I mentioned. If you'd like to find out more, do visit the address at the bottom there. I know my colleague Bobby will be very kindly placing these URLs in the chat stream throughout. You can also get in touch and actually book a chat, no obligations chat, to find out more about Pathway and how to order it and so forth and what's involved. So please do that if you like. Join the discussion on social media if you'd like to. We tend to use the hashtag #TheWholeTeacher because we believe that Pathway and all the advice hub within it is very much about your professional and your personal development too. We're very, very keen, very passionate to support the whole you. I was fortunate enough to have 21 years working in schools as a teacher and a leader, and I've been passionate ever since about supporting the whole teacher if we can, by which I mean your well-being, your resilience, your motivation, and all those other important deep down things that keep us in this profession, in this brilliant profession of ours. We've got a packed agenda today. Inspections, Ofsted inspections in 2021, curriculum, home and flexi-schooling, very apt, very relevant, statutes, regulations and policies, subject to access requests and recorded conversations, leadership and governance, commissioning and external review of governance, human resources, disciplinary procedure. These are the things that we're going to be looking at today, but as ever, we often look at other different aspects as well within these categories, and anything else that's on your mind, feel free to chat. Please use the chat stream or the question and answer, the Q&A buttons, and I will promise to do my best to pose as many questions as I can to our very special guest, as I always do. And Guy never fails to answer all of the questions we throw at him. If this were a tennis match, he replies every time with an ace, so he does jolly well. So we're gonna do it again. We're gonna grill him with all these different questions. So I hope you're there, Guy, and it's great to see you. Great to have you with us again,
Andrew. Yeah, I have been likened to Boris Becker in the past, so.
I wonder where I was going to go with that tennis analogy. Actually, I think I'll find myself one of these machines that just throws balls at you rather than me. I think that'd be better actually. But I know you'll reply every time. So we're going to have a little look at. Shall we just have a quick look at the program, Guy? Do you want to explain what we're going to start with?
Yeah, please, and hello everybody, and welcome back to school. 8 days in, yep. And gosh, it must be 8 working days in, I would say, or sort of 7. Gosh, it must be a challenging time for you all, but hopefully during this next hour we can provide a bit of respite and confidence in you. But I think we're going to take a look first of all at the latest newsletter.
Yeah.
The advice.
Yeah, carry on.
Yeah, well, as you know, Andrew, the Advice Hub is made up of all sorts of things, mainly advice, principally advice and guidance. But we also have frequently asked questions, and we have newsletters. And the purpose of the newsletters is to try and bridge the gap between some of these events and some of the pieces of advice. We've just produced our 4th. They're sort of fairly packed schedules, as you can see there. We've covered 15 areas of topical activity, and hopefully everything of interest to you. And it would come as no surprise, I guess, that the top 5 are COVID-19 related, Andrew.
That's right. That's right.
And we're looking at the reopening of schools and the rules that apply from the 8th. And all that needs to happen in Wales and Northern Ireland as well. We're looking at the staff vaccination status, and just to reassure that NHT are doing everything they can to ensure that staff are vaccinated. Perhaps very importantly, well, not perhaps very importantly, helping children to recover from the lockdown. And that's quite an important piece there. We've stuck in there a letter that you might want to use to write to parents if you feel the need that you have to write to parents just to reassure them of your plans what they have been. That's purely a template, so feel free to print it off and use it at your discretion and in the context of your school. And then we move on to, it's just a reminder there under number 5 about some of the things that should have happened during lockdown, and you might want to go back and sort of use that as a sort of helpful checklist. A quick update there for our colleagues in Wales. There may be some of you on the call, hopefully there are, but there's a quick update for you in Wales. We've also, we'll talk about these, we'll touch on these a little later, a whole 2 parts there about awarding qualifications in summer 2021. And that's mainly aimed at primary and some secondary, and then the performance data update following the government's publication. So you can see the newsletter is very much a reflection of the dynamic events that are happening outside of the sort of more static areas. There's a little bit there around the National Tutoring Programme, assistance with digital technologies, a couple of deadlines, the school's financial value deadline, and gender reporting and wellbeing. I mean, it's a pretty packed document, as you can see, Andrew, but they're all things that we can take a snapshot at any time, and they'll all be as relevant as one another.
Thank you so much. Well, we're going to and we're going to keep coming back to this this large, ever-expanding advice hub throughout this afternoon, just to have a quick look at some of the items, some of the pieces of advice that relate specifically to the topics that we're going to be discussing. But let's kick off with the first item on the agenda, then, which I believe is inspections, guys. Is that right? It is. It is. And we have now, yet again, we're going to be running it pub quiz style, aren't we, Guy?
We are.
Got a question, I think.
That's no reflection on what we do away from the business.
I shouldn't have said that. In the pub, doesn't it? Oh my goodness me.
These webinars, but yeah, I think it's always quite nice to start off with a question for the listeners, and then I'll give you a few of the highlights of what they're going to look like. And of course, inspections haven't gone away, unfortunately. They're still here. But I think the first question I'd like to ask is a nice, simple one, really. When was Ofsted founded? And if you know by whom, by all means, put it in the chat box. But when was Ofsted founded? Which year? And I think there should be a little poll coming up on the screen, which there is. It surprised me. I knew which year, but I wasn't quite sure who was behind it at the time.
Quite split. The vote is quite split, I think.
Yeah, gosh, it's very split, isn't it?
Yeah.
So the answer is 1992, and it was under John Major that Ofsted was introduced.
Have him to thank.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I just wanted to touch on Ofsted inspections, Andrew, because there's been a lot of movement in the last month or two since the 3rd of December, when the government made their announcements for what was going to happen early in the new year. And just to tell everybody who's on the call, there is a paper that's available after the call and that can be made available to anyone who is on the call with all this information in, so you don't have to write everything down. But Ofsted recently published what they called an operational note at the beginning of January, which effectively sets out all the answers and questions about how inspections are going to operate, and a summary of what's going to happen. But the key points are that routine inspections, so Section 5 inspections, remain suspended for the whole of the spring term, at least. That may continue into the summer term. No further, these sort of quasi inspections that happened in the sort of autumn term are going to happen. So no further Section 8 interim visits are going to take place.
Right.
And Ofsted will only undertake Section 8 inspections where there is a pressing need to do so, or where the schools have come under serious concerns that may have been raised by a third party. Okay. So I think overall, light touch.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think that will come as good news to many people on the call, I'm sure, actually. Let's have a very quick look at the inspection section within the Advice Hub, if we may. So, as Guy alluded to earlier, the Advice Hub is built up of several different very important categories, covering the whole broad sweep, really, of teaching and leading and governing schools. And inspections is one of those. So we'll have a quick look inside there. These are some of the advice pieces, and they're constantly being added to all the time by Guy and his team at the NAHT. There we are. And the third one from the bottom, Ofsted inspections from January 2021, is what Guy was just talking to there. So this is the piece of advice that's relating to that element there.
And of course, what we try and do, Andrew, in each of these advice hubs are very much respond to the most commonly asked questions.
Yeah.
So obviously there's the process of Ofsted inspection, but then lots of people want to know how they can challenge an Ofsted inspection.
Yeah.
And that's an absolute key question. And we've devoted a whole section on the inspections advice hub to how to do that successfully. So these are very much driven by people and head teachers rather than what I think or what anyone else thinks that the NHT should be there. Very much driven by the users and people working in education.
Excellent. Brilliant. Some really insightful pieces there. And we'll come and have a look at some of these other categories as well as the afternoon progresses. As the afternoon progresses, it's 4:15 already. So we're going to have a look at the second piece on the agenda, which I believe is curriculum. We have a question.
And the question is similar to the first one, really. When was the national curriculum introduced? And again, if you know by whom, by all means, pop that in the chat box if you wish. But when was the national curriculum introduced? So I can see there's quite a majority, isn't there?
Consensus here, yeah.
And
right?
Yeah, absolutely, 1988. And for those of you old enough, and I include myself, and I'll dare say Andrew in that number.
Baker Day, yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Kenneth Baker, who introduced it 33 years ago. Again, the reason I wanted to include curriculum, Andrew, we'll touch on one or two other areas in curriculum later, but one of the things that has come up probably since the beginning of the year, and since it was known that children were going to return to school, was the whole area of home and flexi-schooling. And again, I just thought I'd highlight a few points here that parents do have the right to homeschool their children. And they cite 4 key reasons, and I'll just touch on them briefly. But I'm sure most of your listeners none of these will come as a huge surprise. So the first one is that they may feel the school isn't addressing the child's needs appropriately. And don't forget, this is the parents. This is nothing to do with the school leaders or those who work in schools. The parents may believe that the school isn't adequately dealing with a bullying issue of which their child is subjected to. They may not be happy with the content of the national curriculum. And finally, they may remove their child because of fear of the possibility of permanent exclusion. And interestingly, lots of the drive, and there's been increasing numbers of pupils who are homeschooling, or parents that are homeschooling rather. And we need to be careful that this isn't perceived to be off-rolling.
That's right. It's close.
It's not off-rolling by schools, especially with those children that fall into the categories I've just asked. And actually, again, this is reflected in the paper that's available to everyone at the end or soon thereafter. There's been recent studies by Ofsted and YouGov that have linked this perception of connected this relationship between children off-rolling and homeschooling, and it's an incorrect assumption. But I'd like to make it clear on my behalf and on behalf of the NHT, the two are completely unrelated, but these surveys reveal a sort of perception that they are related.
They've been mashed up. They've been conflated. Yeah.
Absolutely. And just very finally on curriculum before we move on,
Yeah.
or we take a look at the curriculum section, I've put in there a recent video that Ofsted have released. It's 20 odd minutes long, but summarising the findings on how remote education is working for children with SEND. And it includes examples of best practice, and a colleague of mine very kindly sent that through to me. So
that's a really useful link.
I think it's really helpful. I watched it this morning, and it's actually presented by a couple of Ofsted inspectors who are SEND leads for Ofsted. So anyone with an interest in SEND can certainly have a look at that, and anyone without an interest in SEND can certainly have a look at that and see some of the ideas that are flowing through.
That's excellent. That's really good, and that will be in the document that we're sharing. So we're back in the Advice Hub again, and just looking at the different categories that we've just been discussing, exactly what we've just been discussing. And if we look at, I believe we were just doing curriculum part, and this was the home and flexi schooling, an essential guide. This was an interesting piece that Guy was just referring to, but lots of other really, really essential pieces there, particularly around working, as you said, children with SEND. We'll have a quick look at the home and flexi schooling document. Some interesting pieces here. And if we just jump back in, we'll have a look at that. This was around making RSHE work.
Absolutely. It's, I mean, obviously the pandemic has really, that's quite a short piece because there's so many links, but the RHSE curriculum has you know, the pandemic has clearly been the cat amongst the pigeons, and we touch on this in a while, but the government have taken a very, very sensible, flexible approach after quite a lot of lobbying from the profession and the profession's trade unions to very much introduce this very flexibly over the remainder of the school year, but have left schools in no doubt that they will be expected to deliver it from the beginning of next year.
And it would, at the risk of losing callers for descending into a sales pitch, it would be remiss of me not to mention at least that Discovery Education have created an amazing new product called Health and Relationships, which is a program which enables you to teach the whole curriculum in primary setting. It's a primary resource, and enables you to teach relationships and health education in primary from years 1 all the way up to year 6. And it's a cracking piece actually with films and all that sort of stuff. But brilliant. Okay, thank you very much. Was there anything else on here, Guy, before we move into the next agenda item?
No, I don't think so. I mean, you know, I think people can sort of see for themselves that there's everything there that I think they need to know at the moment, but these are dynamic sections.
They're being added to all the time.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Terrific. So onwards we march to statutes, regulations and policies, I think.
Yes, and this is always one of my most interesting and favourite topics, because it always catches people out. Me sometimes. But I thought we'd touch on a couple of issues here: recorded conversations and SARS, because in my last 12 months at the NAHT, and I've been there for 7 years, 7 or 8 years, these two have come up with increasing regularity. So the question is, can parents and or employees record conversations with school leaders or other staff? So can parents and or employees record conversations with school leaders or other staff? Be interesting to see what the Well, I'm glad I'm not the only one to get caught out. For the 29% of you that voted yes, you are correct.
Wow. So more people said no, actually. And
I think instinctively, I think if I were to ask the question on instinct alone, can they record? I think those that would have voted no would have won the deal. Parents are actually, it's not illegal or not unlawful for parents to record meetings with school staff.
Right.
Even if the recording is made without the school's consent.
Really? Right. I thought you were going to go on and say it's allowed provided you have consent.
Yeah, no, even without the school's consent.
Wow.
Under GDPR, and this is a really important bit to understand, individuals are free to make recordings of meetings as long as the recording is for their own personal use. Now, what I mean by that, Andrew, for their own personal use, is that they're either taping it for sheer convenience, they're either taping the conversation to recollect what was said at the meeting,
right, yep,
and rely on it at a later date.
That's valid, yeah.
Or one that is not so obvious is where English is not their first language.
Yeah. Yeah.
And therefore they may rely later on an interpreter to help them interpret the meeting. There is a however. If the parent or the staff member then shares the recorded information with a third party, they are likely to be in breach of and subjected to the data protection provision.
Right. Okay.
So the way schools can get around it is put in place their own policy and practices.
Yeah.
So they may say, Andrew, for the beginning of the meeting, we are going to provide full minutes of the meeting at the end of the, within 24 hours. And therefore, we would kindly respect you not to record this meeting. If the parents went on to record it, they'd effectively be breaching the school's policy and practice around that. So, again, it's quite important that the school lays out their position at the beginning of every meeting. Tedious as that sounds, it's actually quite important.
No, it's important. And is Amanda's comment right? Is that she suggested here, not if that third party is a lawyer? Presumably, I'm assuming that she's saying that they can share that with a third party if the third party is a solicitor.
Yes, I mean the answer then, Amanda, it would then depend what they went on to use it for, which is what I was literally coming on to next.
Right.
But
sorry, yeah,
no, that's absolutely fine. So let me sort of make another point clear, because this is where there are twists and turns in this whole debate, and that's what makes it interesting. Obviously, more and more employees are using recorded evidence because they may want to take their employer to a tribunal, and therefore they may want to share it with a lawyer.
Right.
And generally speaking, that recording, however it was taken, with or without the school's consent, would be admissible at a tribunal on the basis that tribunal judges have wide discretion to determine whether evidence is admissible or not.
Right.
So it really is down to the tribunal judge, and they'll generally say it is admissible if it's relevant to the issue between the parties in dispute.
Right.
Having said that, again, another quick twist and turn, recordings of private discussions of, let's say, take an example of an employer's deliberation panel, aren't deemed to be admissible unless the recordings revealed clear evidence of discrimination. Right. And there's a really interesting case here, Andrew, I'd just like to touch on, because it was a school, it was a head teacher at a school, and it's out in the open, so I'm not disclosing anything that isn't disclosable. This was a school in London, Amwell View School, where a particular school leader by the name of Dougherty went to a tribunal and used her recording to do so as part of the admissible evidence. And the appeal court, because it went to appeal, said that her recording, her covert recording, that's the key word here, so she did it secretly on her own disciplinary hearing, could be used in evidence because it was relevant. But what she did was, when she left the meeting, she left her device on, her phone on, to record the private deliberations of the hearing panel. And it was that part of the recording that could not be admissible, or wasn't deemed to be admissible to the final judgment.
Well, that was regarded as eavesdropping, I suppose, was it? That wasn't a meeting with her.
Absolutely.
Wow.
So, you know, that's why these things aren't as clear cut. The only thing I can say is I think it's important that schools set out their policy at the beginning, and anyone being asked whether or not they are recording it should be asked to declare so. If they say no, I'm not recording it, and then later rely on the recording, their credibility is going to be compromised in the mind of a tribunal judge.
Okay. Okay.
So that's where it's all about morality and disclosure. A little bit of cloak and daggers, but makes it a little more interesting.
Just thinking back to my time as a head teacher, I suppose if there was something I would like to say but wouldn't say it if I was being recorded, then don't say it.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's a great answer, isn't it? Don't say it. Absolutely.
You know, it's an interesting piece. We've got a full piece on that on the Advice Hub.
Yeah, it's a really interesting piece. We've had a question from Hazel, actually. Thank you, Hazel, saying, is there a model policy for this, please?
There
Advice Hub. Sorry.
Yeah, there isn't a model policy, Andrew, but effectively the advice on the hub could be very straightforwardly converted into a policy. My advice is to get schools to have a policy, but not to over-engineer it. Half a side of A4 would suffice, with a declaration at the end that someone could sign to say that they are recording it or they're not.
Okay.
The best way to avoid recording is to provide a transcript of the meeting afterwards, because then they're you know, on fairly safe grounds if they do that.
Yeah. Yep. I hope you'll forgive me. I introduced the screen while you were talking there, Guy. Sorry. Just wanted to show the different pieces. Go on, Guy. Sorry.
You've got a piece. I'm just trying to desperately find it. Sixth piece down. Recording conversations with parents and employees.
Great.
So, you know, I think it's very very straightforward, and I'd say don't over-engineer this. It's a very simple thing to do, and I think it's just a meeting. I think schools, as people become increasingly litigious, it wouldn't hurt to have, for a school to have a meeting etiquette or meeting protocol that people just signed at the beginning. And I'm just talking about formal meetings here, Andrew. I'm not talking of the sort of, you know, informal chats and get-togethers, but anything that's very formal or has the hallmarks of formality. You know, what you don't want to do is become unstuck because of the technicality on this issue.
Absolutely, yeah. And some other really important topics here, Guy, and again, forever being added to all the time. Some very
important. One right you're hovering right over now, which I'm sure lots of people have been tackling over the next
section 44,
section 44 and section 100.
Yeah,
the whole section on that as well.
Yeah, really important piece. Yes, you've just put this one up actually, so this is very dynamic. It's very responsive to what's actually happening out there at the moment. I think this is why we're so grateful to have this content. It's terrific. And this is part of the Pathway program, which I'll be very quickly walking you through at the end of our discussion with Guy, looking at the other different elements as well. But certainly within the reflection piece, we then find this absolute gem, which is the Advice Hub, constantly being updated with the very latest pieces from Guy and his team. What would we do without you? So we're going to go on to the next one, I think. Well, actually, still within that one, which is SARS, isn't it?
Absolutely. Just a quick one here. Again, we're getting a lot more contact with members who are receiving SARS. So SARS, for those of you who aren't familiar with them, is subject access requests. And they effectively entitle, and have done since 1998, an individual to find out what personal data you hold on them, why, and who sees it. And there's a little piece there about what you must do. This will all be in the paper that's available to people at the end. But again, I just wanted to cover SARS because I just thought, along with recorded conversations, they're another thing to do about data and how it's used. Interestingly, schools, the question they ask is, because you now have to respond to a SAR within 1 month, how on earth can we do that if we've received the SAR at the end of the summer term?
Yeah.
And it's more than a month before we're fully operational.
Yeah.
I actually wrote to the ICO and got a response from the chief exec, basically saying you write back to them with a common sense approach and say we'll do as much as we can this side of the summer term, and when the school reopens, is fully operational, we'll continue to respond to your SAR at that point.
You can't do any more than that.
You can't do any more, but again, it did frighten a few head teachers and school leaders who were faced with SARS right at the end of July, thinking, but how can I respond?
Yeah.
The NHT, in my capacity as an NHT official, wrote to the ICO, and we've got that in writing from them. But have a look there. Again, we've got a whole, I've called it the weaponization of subject access requests, because they are often used rather maliciously or vexatiously. But I think it's an important area. You just have to know what you're doing and time it very clearly. Again, you don't want to be caught out. And it's probably something that your school's designated data protection officer or your school business manager or school business leader is probably got in hand. But again, if you're a school leader on the call, you need to make sure that they have got it in hand. And there's a whole piece on the Advice Hub to help them to do just that.
Great. Yeah. Thank you. Great. Well, shall we go straight on to the next one then? Because I've already kind of had a quick look at statutes. So leadership and governance. You got another of your quiz questions coming?
Absolutely.
Right.
Again, governors are a little bit like parents, Andrew. I mean, they're more head teachers I talk to over 8 years I've been at the NHT, not 7. They say the children are fine. You know, generally the children are fine. The staff give me a headache, but boy, do those governors give me a headache.
This is very familiar to me as a headache.
And I'm sure that most people on the call know what I'm saying, and you know,
and they do a good job as well. There's no question.
They do a fantastic. That's exactly what I was going to say.
For free. Sorry, forgive me. Yeah.
They do a brilliant job, and it's voluntary. They don't get paid. It's often late into the evening. But you know, there are some governors out there whose perhaps enthusiasm outweighs their capacity. So on that note, I would just say, can you ask, as a school leader, whether you be a deputy or the head, probably the head teacher, can you ask for a review of your governance arrangements at any time? Or do you have to wait for a trigger to do so?
Wow, 3/4. I think you can.
Yeah, and interestingly, and the 3/4 of you are correct. Interestingly, quite a fair proportion, of about a quarter, aren't sure. And again, I think this is again something that would be helpful for people to know. The answer is yes, you can ask for a review of your governance arrangements at any time. There are times, there's a mixed economy here though, Andrew. If a school is judged anything less than good, a school is required to commission an external review. Of governance, especially in circumstances where governance, which is one of the Ofsted areas of inspection, is found to be inadequate.
Of course. Yeah.
Sometimes though, you'll want to choose to do a review because it suits you as a school. It might be because you put a new leadership team together. We've suddenly had an influx of new governors joining.
You were having too many visits?
Absolutely.
I certainly had quite a few. No, they were very helpful, to be fair. I mustn't be rude.
Yeah, and you know, so I think the message I'd like to leave people is that there will be automatic triggers where you have to do a review, but equally you can choose to do a review at any time. There's a whole section on this on the Advice Hub. The external review, and don't forget it is an external review, so you've got hopefully some good credibility in the outcomes of that review, would normally take between 2 and 3 days. because obviously getting hold of governors is not as easy as often getting hold of the senior leadership team in the school. And the costs, just to put people's mind at rest, it's not cheap, but it's not prohibitively expensive. You would look to sort of be spending around £1,500
Wow.
on a review of governance.
Wow.
But I think what you'll get in return would be great value for money.
Yeah, I'm sure that's good. Yeah.
And often these reviews, and I've seen quite a few of them, are confirmatory. Effectively, they sort of say the governors are doing an okay job. And actually, if they just improve one or two areas, they'd be doing a fantastic job. But I think it's important that school leaders manage upwards and, effectively, if they can, help to manage their governors and support them. And governors on the whole are pretty grateful for it because they're all in it together.
Of course, no question. I think in my experience as a head, I always found that you could throw pretty much any challenge at me in front of me, and I'll always run at it and deal with it. But when the challenges come from behind you, if that makes sense, do you know what I mean? For those to whom you account, sometimes that can be challenging, can't they? And difficult conversations have to be had sometimes.
They do, and the most common, just to finish on this note, on the section, on this particular part of the section, Andrew, most calls I've handled over the last 8 years isn't because of bad governors or rogue governors, although there are some. It's the fact that governors haven't been taught the ropes.
Yeah.
They don't know how to, they don't know the protocols, they don't know the structures.
But they're keen.
Perhaps there aren't any. And perhaps that's the first thing you need to implement. So I wouldn't want anyone to think about this as something that we're introducing as a punitive measure at all. In fact, it's the exact opposite. It's how you get the best out of a really important stakeholder group in your school.
Oh gosh, yeah. And they would also be pleased to know of their own efficacy, wouldn't they? It's very empowering for them to see, as a result of the review, the impact and value that they're bringing, which is
absolutely. And a healthy relationship between the school leader and the governing body generally leads to a healthy school.
Yeah. So you mentioned that I'm in the advice hub now. We're going into leadership and governance. You mentioned that there was a document that you wanted to have a quick look at within here.
Having a look myself. Let's just have a. So I think it is.
Oh, there we are.
Yep. Commissioning an external review of governance.
Yep.
So it's all there. The links, the principles, how you find a reviewer, which is really important. Other options you might choose. The NGA obviously is the most obvious one.
There's so many links. It's so helpful to have all these links in here.
It is, and the trouble is, Andrew, in this information overload world we live in, if I didn't put some of the links in, this document would be far longer than 5 pages. We have to put the links in because often it's an external document, and if it's updated, the link will take you to the most up-to-date document rather than the one. And there's also templates and tools there.
This is so useful. So useful having that.
Everything you need to do an external review of governance is in those 5 pages.
Terrific support that is actually, Guy. And lots of other really, really useful pieces within this leadership and governance section.
Yeah.
Great. That was a really good piece. Thank you for that. Really helpful. Again, if anybody has questions, please feel free to share them in the chat stream or in the Q&A button, and we'll pose them to Guy either during this or at the end, or as we go along. We're going to have a look at HR. This is a bumper size. This is a huge size category in the Advice Hub. Funny that, isn't it? You have a question?
Yeah, I mean, the question seems quite straightforward, but it's surprising how many people confuse it. Why would you invoke the disciplinary procedure? So it's to improve conduct, performance, or attendance. And it's really interesting, this. I'm a bit of a wordsmith, as I think you are, Andrew, and I think the word discipline derives from the word disciple,
right,
which, as we all know, means to follow. but you have to take a wide view of that word and say, well, it's
Interesting, isn't it?
follow, to observe, to comply. So hence the word disciplinarian. And lots of HR terms, people may know this, are ex-military terms. So when you're dismissed from the
They are
parade.
military terms. Yeah.
When you're disciplined in front of a sort of a court, a court martial.
Fired doesn't help, does it?
No, it doesn't.
Yeah.
So I think it's important that, and the majority of people there are right. It is to improve conduct. Capability is what you would use to improve performance.
Right.
Often the two, often someone's performance is suffering because of their conduct.
Yeah.
And sometimes their performance impacts on their conduct. So that's why it is very easy to get the two confused. But I think where any school leader's got a case of both happening at the same time,
it's tricky.
It's very difficult.
Well, the attitudinal stuff lies in between, doesn't it? Do you know?
It does. It does. And I think you've got to take a tactical decision as a school leader, which is the path of least resistance, which is probably going to get us to a more positive place.
Right. Good advice.
That isn't. They both take roughly the same time to do.
Right.
Probably disciplinary is probably slightly quicker. But what I really wanted to focus on today is not the process itself, because there's a nice big fat juicy document in our advice hub that takes everyone through a step-by-step guide through the procedure. Probably half the calls I take from school leaders are on discipline and how it can be managed. And again, this is all in the paper, but what I wanted to do is quickly outline a three-pronged approach to school leaders handling discipline. Yep. And people will be familiar with the informal, the sort of word in the shell like, or the formal, which is, right, we press the nuclear button here and we go down the disciplinary route, one that shouldn't be entered lightly.
No, quite.
The one I just wanted to quickly expand on is the informal, and often a word in the shell like isn't sufficient. So you might want to consider things like putting something into the performance management arrangements, even if it's mid-year. People think they can't do that, but they can. They may need to moderate one or two of the other objectives, but they can put something into the performance management objectives mid-year or mid-cycle. They may want to arrange refresher training, because if someone is behaving badly, it may be to sort of hide their competency in a particular area, task or activity. So think about having a stern word, which you're entitled to do as a manager. Think about using your performance management arrangements, especially the teacher's standards, part B, which talk about personal conduct and professional conduct for a teacher, a qualified teacher. Or think about refresher training. Obviously, you can jump from all of those informal methods to the formality of a full procedure, but there's a big chunk in the middle, and probably I would say 2/3 of my advice is to go for this one, which is what I call the tactical intervention. So it's not, it goes beyond informal, because sometimes, and I'm sure you might have had experiences, Andrew, and others on the call, where you've had a word with someone, it's just not enough. They just carry on repeating their conduct or behaviour. You've put it in their performance management, but they haven't quite done enough to your satisfaction to improve to the standard that you would expect as a school leader. And they've been on the training, and as often happens with sort of short, sharp bullet training, their conduct improves, and then it reverts to type again about a month later. So, and you might be faced with a conduct issue that you really don't want to take down the formal disciplinary route, because it's time consuming, it's expensive, and it's, generally doesn't end up with a good outcome. The one in the middle, the tactical intervention, is effectively issuing what's called a letter of management advice, or a standard setting letter. So this is where you effectively write a letter, and I'm in the process of popping one on the advice hub soon, where you would write a letter to that person and say, repeat your standards that you're expecting as a school leader, repeat the shortfalls of their conduct and behaviour, and be clear about the improvement that you expect to see.
Yeah.
So it's a hybrid of both the formal. Now that can sit on their file for 6 or 12 months, depending on how you wish to position it. And I think ultimately you can use that as the sort of carrot and the stick. Whereas the informal very much generally tends to be the carrot, and the informal tends to be the stick. This one's somewhere in the middle that you can sort of say, look, this is far more important than us having a conversation, and I'm not prepared to take us down the formality route yet because we haven't reached that far. But what I am prepared to do is take this sort of middle ground, and 9 times out of 10, and I'm not over-egging that, Andrew, at all, 9 times out of 10, it works. Yeah. It doesn't fall into the formal category, it falls into the informal, but it's informal in writing, without going down the written warning, the final written warning, etc. And just finally, on to finish that point, again, people will be reaching for their disciplinary procedures after this, I think. There's a lot more flexibility in good disciplinary procedures, that if you want to look at sanctioning something, you might want to sort of say, right, well, if your performance doesn't improve, and you could put this in the management standards letter, we might have to consider transferring you to another post or location, especially in a multiple academy trust. Not post within the school, because it might be conduct that's created between 2 individuals. Yeah. You might be forfeiting certain terms and conditions of employment. I had a case recently where an independent school effectively took the responsibilities away from someone because of their conduct, and one of those responsibilities meant that she had accommodation with her job, and that was also taken away. And the final one is even demotion. Again, you might want to, as a school leader, it's perfectly legitimate to consider demotion as an outcome, a legitimate outcome of a disciplinary procedure. I suppose my appeal to people out there is, have a look at yours, have a look at the notes that I've put in my paper, and do a checklist, and you might find that having some flexibility of how to deal with these people who aren't performing to the standards you're expecting or behaving is just the sort of thing you might want to see. So some flexibility.
It always interested me, some of the schools I worked in, and 1 or 2 that I took over actually, where 1 or 2 members of staff perhaps were no longer having to perform a particular feature, function within their job description because they did it poorly, and so they had that removed, but their pay and so forth stayed the same. My father-in-law always says, if you're ever asked to wash up, drop the dishes. But I think that doesn't really apply in a professional setting, and it was just something that, and so I dealt with that, and I used to, I ran at situations like that and really tried to address it because it seemed terribly unfair on colleagues. That makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And just for the benefit of listeners, that's a really good example of where somebody's conduct might contribute to the deterioration in their overall performance. But of course, you can't take away something from a teaching and learning responsibility. It's a permanent fixture in your structure and funding. So therefore, it commutes from a performance-related issue, from a behaviour-related issue to a performance-related issue. And that's why there's very fine lines between the two. And in schools, some allowances are time limited and some are permanent. And that's why some of these things morph from one procedure to another. Absolutely.
I think you're right to make the distinction as well. I hadn't really thought of that enough. And they are really quite distinct, and you need to keep them like that. We had a question from Diane, actually, Guy, and I was wondering the same, because I've sent a number of management instructions. Diane says, is this the same as a management instruction when you were referring earlier to the communication that you would have prior to more formal communication? Would you call that a management instruction?
Yes.
That's a phrase I've heard a lot.
Management instruction, I mean, they're either letters of management advice or standard setting letters.
Right. Okay.
Management instruction would be if you failed to attend a meeting that your manager had asked you to attend in your capacity as that relevant person.
Sure.
You didn't attend, you willfully didn't attend.
Yeah.
You will, the disciplinary sort of offence would be dereliction of a management instruction.
Right.
So your manager has asked you to do something reasonable within the scope of your job, and you willfully didn't do it. The failure to do it would be the failure to observe or follow a management instruction. And so failure to do that would then invoke one of the three approaches I've just touched upon.
Yeah.
And the resolution to that would be to issue a management advice or standard setting letter. So they are absolutely, they are linked, Diane.
Brilliant. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, great question. Thank you. Shall we hop over and have a quick look at the very large category that's human resources, if that's okay? Have you got time? Do we just do that briefly? Before we get onto the final piece. So we have, we're in leadership and governance at the moment. Let's just throttle back to all these different categories. And the human resources is a weighty section, actually. I must admit, there's an awful lot in here of really, and if I was still a head teacher, I would be in here all the time. You can download these as well, which is terrific. Really terrific, actually. You can squirrel these away. We had a question while we're looking at this, actually, guys. Sorry, just to cut in briefly. We had a great question from Rob, which is the Advice Hub free to NAHT members? Well, the Advice Hub, obviously, there's lots of advice available to NAHT members, and a lot of it comes from Guy and his team. But this Advice Hub itself, this specific Advice Hub, where you get all these carefully crafted advice pieces, is a central pillar within the Pathway program. And the Pathway platform, which I'll show you at the end of this call very quickly, incorporates multiple different online courses, a well-being course, a course in motivation, guide to motivation, career mapping, skills auditing, the whole myriad of different tools that we use to support the whole you. And that is an annual subscription of £395. But if you're an NAHT member, then that will automatically qualify you for a 25% discount. So that's about £296 per year. But at scale, if you're getting it obviously from multiple teachers within your school, you may even qualify for higher discounts than 25% up to 40%, actually, which is £237 per year. So for 20 or 30 different courses online, I think that's a significant saving, including, I think, frankly, the Advice Hub itself is worth that. But I would say that, I suppose.
Possibly comment, Andrew.
I couldn't possibly comment, no. Guy, anything in here you wanted to pick out particularly? I mean, there's some quite a fit.
Yeah, I mean, the third one down is actually quite good, Andrew. It's the one that sort of
getting it right.
Yeah, I mean, you know, there are so many different ways, and I'm not talking about management style here.
Yeah,
I'm talking about when you've got a problem, and I think it's sort of that first, that sort of second bullet down. I've got a staffing issue. What should I do for? It's off. This is the document you almost want to read first before any of the others, because it's basically describing the approach that you might want to take. And some people take very linear approaches because they're the only approach that they know, or the only approach that they've ever been told, and weren't aware that there were these other flexible, equally legitimate, lawful approaches. So I think, you know, in a sense, if you're going to read one document in the human resources section to give you a sense of what all the other documents contain, this is it. And I would just add, Andrew, that the NAHT documents, which I've been principally the author for, are very much written from a trade union protection perspective. Whilst these documents aren't principally hugely different, they're written on a more developmental perspective.
Yeah, they are. So true.
And they tend to then therefore have a slightly wider scope of subject coverage.
Yeah, no, that's an important distinction.
So I think it is an important distinction, but I think you know, this is a good document. I mean, they're all good because they're all quite. I mean, there's one on exit interviews there that if people are hemorrhaging staff
Mm.
and they don't understand why. I mean, most people never heard of exit interviews. In my experience as an HR director, professional, they are one of the most useful things to know.
Yeah.
They're cheap, they're quick, and they're very effective. Why are people leaving you? You need to know, because otherwise you're just repeating history. And people that call us with high staff turnovers are surprisingly, or perhaps unsurprisingly, the ones who've never heard of exit interviews.
Yep.
And
Obviously.
just the final one there, Andrew, protected conversations. It was somewhere near, you were hovering a little recently. There. These are the facilities that you have to speak to a member of staff whose with who the relationship with the school is effectively broken down. You don't have a clear route to dismissal, but you know that their longevity is short-lived, and you want to find a way of bringing that employment relationship to a premature but protected end for both of you. Again, that's one thing that I spend a lot of my time doing, advising people on protected conversations. They're relatively new. So again, some really good stuff in there, and probably certainly the most voluminous section, Andrew, of the hub.
As a head teacher, it required most of my time. Let's be brutally honest about that. Maybe that's just the way I run the school.
Absolutely. I haven't done the MPQH, but I know lots of head teachers that have, and they tell me, every single one of them, we don't do HR. It's not covered. It's one of the few things that isn't covered at all well. So perhaps unsurprisingly, it's one of those sort of hungry sections.
Just while we're going to wrap up now, actually, and I need to go and pick up my daughter from school. But shall we have a quick look at the FAQs? You wanted to mention that, didn't you, Guy? Because it's a good section, this.
Yeah, it's a good section. Yeah. I've got constantly adding to. I've got another to add this week. I mean, these are areas, and you probably think, well, why are these areas in the FAQs and others aren't? I think some of these are areas that are best dealt with by a frequently asked questions session. So if you go in any of those sessions or sections, you'll find the most commonly asked question and the direct answer to it, rather than trying to sort of trawl through pages and pages and try to find the answer. So there's some really good ones there. There's one or two also, Andrew, like the education, health and care plans that are sort of theoretical. Right. They tend to be what's relevant at the time of the actual event happening. But again,
just in this document, just in this particular piece alone, we have multiple different frequently asked questions just in this section alone, which is extraordinary. This is an enormous document.
Absolutely, and of course this was the COVID-19 one.
Of course, so
which was changing hourly when I was writing it. But there are some there that are, there's the HCP ones where there's specific issues. I mean, obviously they're anonymized, but they were based on real cases, questions that we had asked by head teachers.
Absolutely.
And our responses to them. So, again, it's a really very practically based guidance document that's very specific to the issues that each document relates to.
Terrific. Absolutely terrific. What an amazing resource to have. It really is to have this, and it's constantly being updated, because I know it is, because you're sending me the documents and then I'm uploading them onto the system every week. So literally hundreds of different advice pieces, some of them many pages long, as we've just seen. So as ever, I'm sorry to wrap it up on time. My daughter will be waiting at the bus stop. Quite literally. She's already texted me to say I'm there. So
it's really good to hear someone practice what they're preaching, Andrew.
Oh, too right. Yeah. So I'm ever so grateful. I really am. Thank you so much. And I know everybody on the call will have really appreciated your sage advice, as always. I'm going to stick around for about a minute and a half to give people a lightning speed walk through the Pathway platform itself. before I get another text from my eldest daughter. So, Guy, thank you so much for joining us.
Goodbye,
Great
everyone. Take care. All the
Thank
best.
you very
Bye-bye.
much. Brilliant to see you. Right, so we'll have a quick look at the Pathway Programme, and then I'll share with you the news of the next webinar that we're going to be doing soon. So the Pathway Programme then, as I've mentioned on many of these calls, is in partnership and friendship and fellowship with the NAHT, our brilliant partners throughout this entire project. It's just been terrific working with them. We have such similar values, which is to enable teachers and leaders to flourish in their careers and to stay in their careers for a long and flourishing career. So, and that really means supporting the whole you rather than just your professional skills, important though that is. So Pathway is built with you in mind, and it's built very much around your professional and your personal development too. So there are 3 sections: orientation, navigation, and reflection. In the orientation section, you'll see the motivation guide, you'll see a skills audit, and you'll see career maps. So the motivation guide is literally what it says. It's helping you to understand the nature of motivation, the language of motivation, how to monitor your motivation, where you write your own motivation plan, no less, aligned to your job description. And if that job description changes, you can change the motivation plan. It's also an important way of keeping an eye on what demotivates you and how you can address that. And 2 skills audits: a teacher standards audit and a leadership competences and skills audit, where we give you lots of different categories, different fields, based on the teacher standards or based on a collection of different leadership skills that we've identified working with many experienced head teachers and recruiters and so forth. And you can keep coming back to your answers as you progress. And then a career map, where you can use our mapping tools to look at the professional roles you wish to achieve in the years ahead, the extracurricular activities and all the different things, how you bring extra value to the school, how you want to progress those and grow those, and then also your health and well-being. So some health and well-being goals that we mustn't ignore, that we need to write down and stick to if we can through our profession. And then the navigation section is a huge section where we have all the multiple CPE courses. We call it CPE, which is Continuous Professional Empowerment, because we want it to empower you and help you with your agency and your self-efficacy. So many, many different courses here, with more courses being added each year. And if we just click on any of these different courses, this one was with Mike Childs, terrific author and teacher, and an expert in assessment for learning. We have overview, key themes explored, and then all the different units within that program. And every unit is built in the same way in every course, which is an introduction, a film to watch, a roundtable discussion, if you like, and then a thought piece to read, and then some questions for reflection, some coaching questions, which are saved and bookmarked, and you can keep coming back every time. And unlike a lot of online CPD courses, once you complete it, it doesn't vanish. It's open all the time, and it forms really part of your ongoing learning portfolio, your professional learning portfolio. So we're really proud of the navigation section. 21 courses at the moment, each of which requires a few hours of your time, in your own pace to complete. And then finally, the reflection section, where we have the brilliant wellbeing program by Professor Tim O'Brien and his writing partner, Dr. Dennis Guiney. And they've done the most incredible program supporting your well-being and your ability to critically reflect and understand how to traverse the emotional landscape. So it's all about your critical reflection and monitoring your well-being and understanding what that actually means. It's a hugely empowering program. And again, always keep it open, and you can keep coming back and changing your answers to those coaching questions for reflection that Tim will be asking you throughout. And then finally, of course, and we've seen it already, the jewel in the crown, I think, from a head teacher's point of view, is the brilliant NAHT Advice Hub, filled with all the latest advice. So I hope that's been useful for you. I'm going to have to go and collect my children now, and I hope you have a great evening. Next time, we're actually going to be doing a webinar. In fact, it's actually next week, no less. Next Tuesday, we're going to be running a webinar with the brilliant Dave McPartlin, which I'm sure you've probably come across. He's a terrific head teacher at Fleet Primary School. You might have seen him and his children on the Britain's Got Talent show, and a great many other different places where he's really, his dare to dream culture has really come alive. And I want to talk to him about his culture, his attitude to school culture, and how he builds an aspirational culture in an area of the country where he has a significant number of pupil premium, disadvantaged and vulnerable children. and he's creating something very special at Flake Fleet. So let's get into a conversation and find out how he's doing it. So I'm looking forward to that, and I hope very much you'll be able to join us. It's next Tuesday, 23rd at 4 o'clock. So until then, thank you ever so much. Again, if you'd like to find out any more about Pathway, please click on the URL that's been shared in this chat stream, and you can book your chat with our team to find out how to take this further. And I very much hope you do, and I hope you'll join us next time. Thanks very much indeed.